Thank you so much for joining us, Mike, today. How do you see finance being at the centre of Birmingham's just transition to a net zero carbon city?
Well, I think finance sits at the heart of any project. In terms of Birmingham net zero, clearly the focus is on all the things that need to be done, energy, housing, transport. And when people are starting to work out, what needs to be done, they then get to the question, well, how are we going to finance this? Where are we going to find the money? So it's typical across the world that many projects around climate, a lot of work is done in the real economy first. What do we need to do? What do we start doing? And then people get to the money question. So it's central. It often follows the work that starts off saying this is what we need to do.
Yeah, I think there were certain things. I mean, my neighbour, he has some solar panels that he had fitted in. I was quite interested in doing something like that. But when I looked into the price of it, I thought, oh my God, £8,000 for me to have those solar panels installed on my roof. And then I think, it depends on whether you can afford it or not. I suppose that would have an impact on how eco-friendly you can be, I suppose.
Well, that's a really good example, Mahmooda. As you probably know, there were subsidies around, so the price of those originally was probably quite cheap because there were subsidies. That's a really good example of looking at it on a sort of individual basis. Clearly, if we are going to, let us say, convert Birmingham's transport system to totally running on clean energy, the way you might contribute to financing that is different to how you might buy a solar panel. So I think looking at the scale of the project and the role of different people in what is a massive project is a key perspective that you brought to this conversation.
Yeah, and I think over time, as people start using things a lot better, I suppose the price would come down eventually.
That's right. That's been very clear. I can use an example in Australia, where there was a big move. Clearly, Australia, lots of sun. So once they started putting solar panels on roofs, you get a whole industry, you get engineers who fit them, so you do get the benefits of scale. I guess the best example, if you think in the UK, is how we're going to build a charging network across the UK for electric cars. That's perhaps a more local example. Of course, Birmingham would be a piece of that.
Yeah. Mike, you're from the world of global finance. What do you see as the barriers to getting finance into local projects?
Well, in some ways, although it might seem strange in this context, climate has not been a great sort of driver in finance. Finance is often about risk. So when people look at a project, you looked at a local solar panel on the house project, people think about sort of risk and pricing and can we afford the price around that risk. So, one of the barriers is getting people to recognize the risks of climate finance, which then drives finance into these projects. But climate finance is this sort of slightly long-term, although it's not because we're having things now. So actually getting finance to recognize it needs to flow into sort of mitigation, reducing climate risk projects, getting the right people involved sometimes, and this may apply in the local context. Projects need different groups of people around them which haven't got used to meeting together. So one of the barriers is once you've got this project, who are the stakeholders, who are the partners, who are going to drive this forward? Because those are the people, the providers of finance, will be looking to get the comfort that this is a project, this is an initiative that they are attracted to finance. So quite often getting to, we've got this attractive project, people who are providing the money will sort of ask about, how's it organised, at what stage is the project, and look at the different stages, and really going to the decision makers around the project who are looking for that finance. So quite often you get to the way that a project is structured, makers around it.
And just breaking it down to our level, me as an individual, if I was to become a bit more eco-friendly with less carbon footprint, what kind of funding can I have access to as an individual to help me along to be more environmentally friendly?
Well, I have to say, sort of locally, I'm not familiar with the organisations that do that. But if I can answer your question a different way,
Yeah.
if you had, and this is sort of slightly moving into activism, because obviously, you know, your money is a resource and you're interested in, you know, when you spend money. So one of the things that is happening is that individuals are beginning to be more interested in where their money is invested, maybe their pensions or their savings or who they bank with. And I think one of the things that is sort of just beginning to grow, and I'll talk about an initiative that's about to be launched, and I think might even be launched between now and the day of the actual event. There's an initiative called Make My Money Matter. The clue is in the title, Make My Money Matter.
Yeah.
So if an individual begins to think, well, I've got this pension and I don't really understand pensions, but I've never thought about it before. So the very act of asking questions about, you know, where your money's invested or what your bank is doing. If you go back, you may remember the sort of protests about tax payments by some retailers. I think making people realise that their money is one stake in the future. So it's not just funding to do things, it's actually the organisations that are delivering existing services. They're beginning to think, I'm an involved consumer, I do all these things as a citizen, it's clearly a political issue, I do these things with my money, I'm an employee. And as I was preparing for this conversation, I suddenly thought, well, there may be people you know, involved even in the council who have pensions locally. So just getting people aware of the ability, you know, to ask questions and use their influence as citizens, I think is probably still underappreciated.
I suppose we can all do our bit by making it a bit more aware, creating a better awareness amongst people.
Yes, and if it's part of the daily conversation, then in fact that gains momentum because, you know, the conversation feeds off people, off other conversations. So if you're speaking about this in the context of money, it may also feed into conversation about the way, you know, you go shopping. So I think as climate, you know, we've all experienced this, you know, dreadful pandemic. In one way, that's a risk that's come home. Climate, as they famously say, there's no vaccine for climate change. So, you know, this is a long-term risk, and the more I'm thinking of the people attending the event today, the more people just get engaged with the conversation and think about it as part of their lives and how they can affect it. Yes, in part it's getting money to do things you weren't doing before, but it's also thinking about money that's in the system already.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm conscious we're running a bit out of time here, but as you know, Birmingham is a very unequal city that needs to be leveled up with everybody benefiting from it, becoming net zero carbon. How can we get finance into projects where the main benefits are better health, improved quality of life, as well as financial?
I think let's go back to what we were talking about before, the council at the centre of this. So I think one of the ways is, you know, the council serve the whole population of Birmingham, but historically their source of finance may have been, you know, through the sort of public policy lens. So I think, you know, one way of doing that is as the council serves the population, they widen their sort of conversations. And I was speaking earlier about bringing other people in the conversation. So having that sort of public-private finance conversation could be a very useful way forward as momentum sort of builds around the project.
Yeah, definitely. And Mike, you have you've had held several senior positions in the pension fund management. How can we encourage funds to invest in Birmingham projects?
Well, now you need to be careful because I'm an actor and I can talk about pensions for a long, long time. We don't need to do that. But simply, If we look at pensions in the local authority area, there are now 8 pools of pensions capital. Pensions were sort of reorganised in England a few years ago, and there is a pensions pool which has 8 local authorities: West Midlands, Worcestershire, Staffordshire, so a sort of centre of England. So one thing would be to begin to engage with councillors. That's the way these are run. Councillors may sit on the pensions committee, so engaging with the pensions committee and having a conversation about the pensions for Midlands. In your case, clearly there were 7 other sort of pension committees. Beginning to have a conversation about how the investments on behalf of the beneficiaries of the West Midlands pension scheme, and I can tell you, they are moving down the responsible investment path well, but sort of giving off to that conversation, again, making this a topic of conversation and assisting making to move forward. That would be one way, through councillors who discharge their responsibilities through that pensions committee.
Yeah, thank you for that. And finally, what do you see as a role for local sources of funds for projects rather than big finance?
Well, we've touched on that on one of your earlier questions.
Yeah,
I think the goal is that a lot of big finance, it is big, it's national, it's international, there are sort of big pension funds that seem rather distant. So I think what could be really helpful would be to sort of develop a conversation, develop a network. Clearly, Footsteps is feeding into the task force for Route to Zero. So if people find a way of building that network, learning from other cities, I'm thinking here of others I know. I think Chris has been involved with conversations with them. Bristol are doing good work. Leeds are doing good work. A lot of work about climate is collaborative, because none of us know that much about it. I know a little bit about my little sort of finance world, but a lot of the good work on climate is collaborative. As people work together and say, we have this massive challenge. We need to work together to do this, whether it's in an energy project, whether it's in finance. And because it's such a big challenge to all of us, then I think this great sense of collaboration, of working together, whether it's in finance or whether it's energy or housing. So I think sort of building those networks of resources and gradually increasing the priorities of work in this area. I think that's the way to take this work forward.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us. Very grateful to you for taking time out to talk to us. Thank you very much, Mike.
It's my pleasure, and I look forward to being present during the rest of the event.
Brilliant. Thank you.